hello, everyone, and welcome to Entrepreneur Talks podcast run by Women Flix. So today I have Sunil Godse. I believe that I'm saying your name right, Sunil, but thank you so much for your presence and welcome to our podcast.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Happy to share some nuggets of wisdom on the complex nature of intuition and particularly how it helps you make the right entrepreneurship decision every single time.
Fantastic. Sunil, said your name in the right way?
Yeah, Sunil Godse. So
Oh,
that's pretty good.
fantastic.
Yeah.
That's really good. Thank you so much. And now just tell us, where are you talking from? Which
So
country?
I'm in London, Ontario, Canada, just outside of Toronto. It's about an hour and a half drive or a couple hours, depending on traffic outside of Toronto. So it's a little bit chilly, but it looks like we're having a green Christmas, hoping for a bit of snow before
Oh,
Santa comes.
oh, fantastic. Oh, good, good. All right. So let's go. So Sunil, in 3 words, who is Sunil? I
Uh,
hope you can say
and
this.
a successful entrepreneur.
Oh, one more. No? Successful
That's
entrepreneur.
three. Yeah,
Three.
no, a successful entrepreneur. 3 words, right?
Ah, okay. Gotcha. That was my bad. I should say three, four.
Or I could say intuitive branding works. There's three more.
That's really good. I learned. So let's go. What got
Absolutely.
you? So I know you work with intuition, but what got you interested in intuition? What happened?
Yeah, so it really came from after I wrote my first book called Fail Fast, Succeed Faster. And the premise of that book was that if, as a business person or as an entrepreneur, if you were to learn the failures of others by reading all these stories of all the different things that could possibly go wrong, and put it in a book, then conceptually you should be able to succeed faster because somebody else has already made the mistake for you. And
Right.
so, I interviewed close to 300 people for that book. 75 stories made it into the book itself. And one of the things I kept getting asked on stages across the world when I was going on my book tour was, Sunil, come on, give me the one thing that's going to make me successful as an entrepreneur. And at that time, I used to roll my eyes saying, oh, come on. Okay, this is a 400-page book. If it was one thing, I'd come here with like a business card with it on the back. And that was it. So and then it just never struck me until I went back and listened to the audio recordings, because I just enjoyed listening to those stories. And when I started to pay attention to those audio recordings, what I absolutely missed was this key ingredient that people were talking about called intuition. And
Mm,
80 to 90% of them said either I ignored my gut, I should have trusted my intuition, I knew what the right decision was, but I didn't make it. And I said, wow, I completely missed that common thread. And so that got me taking a look at thinking, okay, what is this thing called intuition? And why do we ignore it? And so when I look back at the decisions I made, I distinctly remember my first entrepreneurial venture was when I was 5, and there were these video games that my
wow.
dad that I wanted to buy, and my dad said no, they were too expensive. And so I distinctly remember this voice saying, "Sunil, go door to door to raise money," and that's exactly what I did. I went and then on a Saturday afternoon, I raised $200. $100 went to my dad for the video games, and the other $100 went to charity because I
Wow.
enjoyed that. I really liked that. So that was my first brush with listening to my intuition. But quickly, when I realized when I ignored my intuition, I got into a career as a South Asian male doctor, lawyer, engineer, or failure. There's only 4 career doors you have. And I picked door number 3, which was the engineer. And I didn't really like it. It was a great career in that I was able to have some managerial responsibilities, but everything entrepreneurial in nature in those jobs was what I loved. And so it's the second year into that engineering career, I got a chance to become a private investor in a restaurant. And pretty soon, I was making 5 times more in dividends than I was making as an engineer. And I quit after year 3, lost my relationship with my dad, but then went on to become a management consultant. While I was a management consultant, there was this contract down in the States that was huge in terms of money. And I said, I got to go down there. This is a great opportunity. And
Right.
my intuition, though, was saying, don't take it because the contract terms were changing. But I was so emotionally drawn in with the money that I ignored my intuition, and that company never paid me. And I came back to Canada with 25 cents in my bank account. And
Whoa.
And the most devastating story of ignoring my intuition was when I was in engineering. I was doing some personal coaching at the time, and I had a friend of mine reach out to me to try and get some help because she was being stalked at the time by someone, and my intuition was saying, "Please meet with her. We meet with her that afternoon." And I started to get the sense that I needed to. There was a sense of urgency, but I had a couple of people convince me to go for beers, and I said, would you mind meeting in a couple of days later? And like a good friend that she was, she said, sure. And what ended up happening is the very next day, that stalker walked up to her at a bus shelter and put a bullet through her forehead.
Oh my God.
And
Oh,
so when I take a look at, okay, why did I ignore my intuition?
yeah.
And why did I trust it? And I really needed to figure this thing out. And so this is when I started to dive into the actual research to find out, okay, what does intuition actually comprise of? I mean, how is it? And so what I ended up finding out is there were a number of research articles. Like I heard it when I was 5 years old. So the first premise is that you're born with intuition. And lo and behold, I find a paper that shows that infants as young as 2 months old have been shown to have intuitive tendencies. And the other thing that the research showed is that your intuition sits in the subconscious area of your brain. So if you look at your brain like an iceberg,
Right.
90% is below water, 10% above water. And so and the intuition hits the amygdala, which is the fight or flight center of the brain. Now it's virtually impossible to compartmentalize the brain because it all works in one unison. But when MRI studies were looking at when people use their intuition, it was the amygdala area that had lit up as one of the first ones before all these other areas lit up. And so the research is clearly showing that intuition actually does work. And so when it comes to how quickly it works, other research has shown that, particularly when it comes to entrepreneurship, when somebody engages with your brand, um, it takes your intuition as little as 33 milliseconds to start to sense whether you have a brand that can be trusted or not, and up to 14 seconds for your intuition to tell you, okay, there is a trusted brand here, either through your marketing, your sales, or how you're running your company.
Right.
Your employees and customers will sense within 14 seconds whether they want to deal with you or not. And that's how quick it is. And when you have you take the steps to use intuition to trust, develop that trust or earn that trust with others, then you're able to eliminate your competition because your top talent want to come work for you, and your customers prefer buying from you because they believe in what you're doing.
This
And
is
that's essentially what intuitive branding is. And so, how complex intuition is it's like driving a car.
right.
That's the best
Yeah.
way. And so, if you're driving a car, you either push the button or turn on the keys, and then you hear the engine whir. That engine noise are things called intuitive signals. And so, these intuitive signals, there's two types. There's positive and negative ones. And so, what a positive signal tells you to do is to say, okay, based on the business decision that you're about to make, I'm going to send you a positive signal, that which means go ahead with that decision. And a negative signal obviously is different. I mean, obviously it's going to say back away from that decision. And so we each have a unique set of positive and negative intuitive signals. And so to give you an example of some of the unique ones I've heard about, there was one CEO who has now run two multi-million-dollar businesses based on this omen popping up on his right shoulder. And another entrepreneur who I was talking about his intuitive signal, says, I've never actually thought about it that way, but let me come back to that question. And as he was talking about all the ventures he went into for the wrong reasons, which is money, fame, or ego, he started to grab his left earlobe, and it just finally dawned on him, like, oh my God, Sunil, I just realized my negative intuitive signal is my left earlobe getting hot. And so that's how unique our
Ah,
intuitive signals are. Yeah. And so if we come back to that car analogy, now I've kind of discovered the engine sound. And if it sounds really good, you drive the car. If it sounds really bad, you take a look, take it to the mechanic. And what does the mechanic do? It pops open the hood. So for us to drive the car, we don't need to be mechanics. I don't know much about pistons and gears and all that stuff. But this is how complex your intuition is. What drives the engine noise, or what drives those signals, are these four types of intuition. And each one of these four types of intuition work together to gather information to give you that signal. And the best way I can describe each of those four types of intuitive types is by sharing a story of a non-believer.
Oh,
So yeah, so this is a friend of mine named John Rothschild. So this guy
Sunil,
was yeah,
Sunil, just because before we go to this story, don't forget,
yeah,
I want to make sure I mentioned something that you were talking at the beginning regarding the intuition, because it's such a big important thing in our lives, like to anything, no matter if
yep.
business, life in general, is such a good thing. And thank you so much for bringing this topic to our podcast. And now let's listen your friend that you were about to.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. Like intuition is such a critical part of any decision that you're making. And so this is where the complex part of intuition comes, because some people may think, well, it's just a signal. Where do the signals come from? What makes up this information? And so with my friend John Rothschild, who this guy was an investment banker. So for him, data, worksheets, spreadsheets, that's all that matters when it comes to any business decision that you make. So at the time that I interviewed him, if you looked at the research at the time, if you didn't go to an academic database, then people were talking about intuition like it's coming from the cosmos or, manifestation. And so to him, as an investment banker, he said, okay, Snail, look, intuition does not like, I don't know what you're talking about. Um, Intuition doesn't, it just doesn't exist. I mean, it just doesn't. And so I was telling him about the CEO with Omens and who ran two multi-million dollar businesses on that. He says, Sunil, I'd love to shake this guy's hand. This is on video, by the way,
Yeah.
capturing him saying this. And he said, look, okay, when you make any kind of decision, it's always based on learning and experience. And so now we're going to start to dive into the four types of intuition one by one. One of the
Right.
first types of intuition is called experiential intuition. And if you go back to that analogy of the iceberg, the brain being like an iceberg, when you're born, we have 5 to 6,000 experiences per day. And when you're older, 28 to 35,000 experiences per day. Every single one of those pieces of experience, both good and bad, every single piece of learning that you have, both formal or informal, go into the subconscious area of your brain like a library from when you were born. So when you actually make a decision today, you have billions and billions and billions of data points that are the intuition is drawing from that help you tell you what if that decision is going to be right or not. So if you've made a right decision in the past, similar in nature, that turned out well, your intuition is going to send you a positive signal saying that this is what happened. Or conversely, if this was a business decision that didn't work out well, your
Yeah.
experiential intuition is going to send you a negative signal. And so what I was telling John is that sometimes your intuition will have you go against the data. And he goes, wow, Sunil, that's really interesting that you mentioned that. I actually have a story where that happened. And so John was in the business of putting franchise locations in, like McDonald's, Wendy's, Dunkin' Donuts, things like that.
Right. Yes.
And his team would measure that on a scale of 10. And so anything from a 9 or above would mean that they would go ahead with that franchise. And they would look at things like demographics, development in the area, and traffic patterns as examples. But there was this one place in Toronto that was a 5.5 out of 10. And his team was they said, there's no way we're putting a franchise location here. Yet now we're going to get into second of the two, called situational intuition. And we've all experienced situational intuition when we walked into a room and we go, something is off. And
Yes.
so John went into that area knowing that it was a 5.5 out of 10. And his situational intuition was telling him, something's wrong with that number. And so he went against his team's analysis and says, I think we're going to put a franchise location here. And that ended up being he put it something called the beer market, which became a huge success in his whole portfolio of franchises. It was the most profitable by going against the data. And so now John is starting to use the words, perhaps it was intuition, at a time half an hour in where he was saying before, intuition doesn't exist. So
Yeah.
I'm kind of getting him there. And then
Wow.
at one point, his purpose
Yeah.
changes. He says, I no longer want to be an investment banker anymore. I actually want to run a company. And now we're going to get into the third of the four called relational intuition. And what relational intuition does is it looks at the people in your life, both the
Mhm.
mentors, your friends, and it's going to filter out only those that you're going to bring closer who really care, truly care about your success. These aren't yes people. These are people that will give you constructive criticism, but you absolutely know that you can call on them, especially
Right.
when things don't
Yeah.
don't go well. They're there for the thick and the thin. And in John's case, everybody who was concerned about money, fame, ego, high-end restaurants, private jets, limousines, they all said, John, you're nuts. Like, why are you trading off a $3 to $4 million a year career to run a business from the ground? Like, are you nuts? But nobody bothered to ask him why, except his wife. And his wife asked John, why are you doing this? And so now on camera, John says, Sunil, sometimes you can have all the data, but you have to trust your intuition.
Yeah.
And he tells his wife, this just feels right. And that was his positive intuitive signal saying, go ahead. And now we're going to get into the fourth of the four called creative intuition. Creative intuition is the one that actually has you make the decision. So if you're making a decision like you're going to eat a sandwich or turn left at the lights, your creative intuition is pretty low because there's not much risk associated with it.
Mm.
But in John's case, you would think his intuition would give him an opportunity to run a business that had healthy revenues, strong cash flows, good balance sheet, but not his intuition. He says, John, no, just for you. We've got this tiny bankrupt little restaurant just for you. So his creative intuition was really high in that here's a $3 to $4 million a year opportunity as an investment banker. Here's a tiny bankrupt little restaurant, but it felt right. And he walked into that tiny bankrupt little restaurant. That restaurant ended up being Eastside Mario's location number one. And over the next 20 years, he grew that to over $2 billion in revenues, all because it felt right. And that's how intuition works.
Wow. Thank you so much for the great explanation and teaching. This is unbelievable, awesome, because there we go. It's just the way you said intuition is so powerful.
Yes,
And I believe, Sunil, that intuition took you where you are as well right now, right? Everything.
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, intuition's been there for every single decision that I've made. And this is where, people talk about not failing or failure is an amazing teacher because what failure teaches you, it helps you learn is that you've missed from my perspective, you missed an intuitive signal.
Yeah.
And it also is now a data point that goes into your intuition in the subconscious area saying, okay, I know you failed at this, or this was a hardship, or what have you, but let's learn from that. So the next time you're going to repeat something similar, I'm going to send you a negative signal to say, don't do that again. And as long as you're listening to your intuition, as long as you're paying attention to those signals, you won't repeat that again because your intuition's already told you that. And so
Really
all the
good.
decisions I made, both good and bad, all my learning, both positive, negative, formal, informal, all are some things that my intuition works on. And so for me, I always pay attention to those signals that I have. And so typically my first positive signal, and you have to make sure you think about the first ones,
Yes.
because what happens is when you ignore the first signals, they get louder and they start to shift until you can't hear them anymore. And in fact, I had one person who I interviewed who was in a bad relationship, and she heard the words get out. Her intuition literally told her those words. And she finally got rid of that person, but she was financially devastated. And I had another CEO who was running a 9-figure mortgage company, and his intuition was telling him for a while to quit.
Oh,
And he just ignored his intuition, and it got louder and louder until he was in the back of an Uber. And all of a sudden, he just blurts out the words, you couldn't control it, you're quitting. And so he
oh,
goes to, that was the ultimate signal. He just went to his board and he says, sorry, I'm just done with this company. And he left at the height. They were making 9 figures and he left. So this is what happens with your intuition. And so
Yeah.
these are the signals that you pay attention to, with the voice being mine, which is positive, my first one. And my
Yes.
first negative one is I lose my peripheral vision and I get hyper focused. It doesn't mean I'm seeing something. I'm thinking about something, a business decision I'm about to make, and it's not the right one. And so I get hyper focused, my eyebrows cross, and I know that there's a problem. And so that means that either I have to get more information, I have to talk to a mentor or rely on an employee to get some more information or get them to do something before I can go ahead with this decision. There's something I need. And if I can't get those pieces of information, then I know that I have to back away from that business decision. And
Yeah.
what entrepreneurs do way too much is one of two things. They swing way too much on the emotional side, or they swing way too much on the rational side, the data, what has worked before, where intuition is right in the middle, where there's a balance of head and heart, as I say, or emotions versus logic. There's a really good balance there. And
Mm.
so in entrepreneurship, you have to make sure that you make a well balanced decision. And so what I do in intuitive branding is I look at the way to make decision through the four types of intuition and intuitive signals first. And then that takes out the emotions, that gives you information about where you should be getting information for that business decision so
So
that you can
beautiful.
make a robust decision. And when you have a really good, robust decision, then you're making the right decision to move your business forward.
Interesting. I was thinking while you were talking, I was thinking, yes, Women Flix started like that. Entrepreneur Talk started like that. Our
Awesome.
our podcast. And how is between you and your family? How is the intuition around your family, your house?
Oh, big time. So because my I've got two girls, 10 and 14. And so as much as they roll their eyes when I talk about intuition, because I talk about intuition all the time, um, both of them have been infused with intuition. And so if you look at my two girls, they were able to both move away from bullying incidents before the bullying actually happened. And if you look at things, so if you look behind me on the wall here, I've got two paintings. And so my 14-year-old daughter, when she was 12, she went to India. She's been an artist, and she saw people painting with no arms. And she goes, "Dad, I need to do something with these people, for these people." And I said, "Well, it has to be,
Wow.
obviously, it has to come from your intuition." And 6 months later, she says, "Okay, Dad, I'm ready." And I said, "Ready for what?" And she goes, "I want to sell my paintings. I'm going to do pop-up events, and I'm going to raise money by selling my paintings to run these pop-up events." And I basically said, "If you're sure, let's do it." And so we actually opened an official nonprofit business. She had her first. She made 5,000 on her first fundraising when she was looking at 2,500, and she's now collected $30,000 in just over 2 years. And where this sense of purpose comes in for her is we were at a pop-up event. There was someone who had a cerebral palsy, and this, if you look at my arm, his left arm was just shaking violently. And he said, "Avni, please come here." It's my daughter's name, Avni. And he says, "Look," and his arm is shaking violently. And he says, "I have never painted since I was 14. It's about 30 years ago." And he goes, "Look what this event is doing." And what he does is he dips his brush in paint, and then he starts to paint, and his arm stops.
Whoa.
And he goes,
Powerful.
"This is what you're doing for me. Thank you so much. And please continue to do that."
That's
So that's where
beautiful.
purpose comes in. And then for my younger daughter, she sees her older sister now running a business. So she goes, "Dad, I want to run a business." And I said, "Okay,
Oh,
well, then you got to raise $500." So we gave her a really high bar. And it took her 5 days. 5 days to raise $500. She phoned her grandpa. She tapped me for money. She hopped on a Zoom call with one of my friends. Did a 15-minute pitch there, and I had a podcast interviewee who was actually asking about her, and he
oh,
said, "I'd love to hear a pitch." And so we set up a Zoom pitch for her, and 15 minutes later, she was actually done in about 8 minutes. He goes, "That's it? That's the pitch?" She goes, "Yeah." I said, "Okay, where do I put the $100?" And so
wow.
now we're moving ahead with her. She wants to. She's doing bookmarks, so we're in the process of designing bookmarks to raise money for Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto, because she's also singing, and one of her fans is Taylor Swift, who's also donated to Sick Kids Hospital in Australia, and she loves reading and she wants to increase knowledge. So we combine that whole purpose into a business that's going to launch on Shopify actually probably next month. So
That's so nice, Sunil, because I can see a lot of, I can listen through the stories of your girls, a lot of entrepreneurship, purpose, but the intuition, I believe, like they come to you and say, Daddy, what about if we do this? And it's the way they feel, and you just follow them and support them, right?
Yes, it's very, very important that we get them to make the decisions. That we can guide them as mentors,
That's
and what we have to really be careful is to overrun that with our
decisions.
own ways of doing things.
Yeah,
One of the things I tell my girls, which is right up my alley with my first book, is you will fail. You are going to get into things, and you things are going to happen.
yeah,
And if that happens, you got to be able to pick up the pieces, learn from that, and move on. And so, with my older daughter, we've had issues with time management and responsibilities. We had hard discussions about that. Running a business is not just like you could say you're doing it. You actually
yeah,
have to put some time in. And for my younger one, she wanted all her friends to come in, and I said, okay, are they in? And pretty soon in 1 week, they all peeled off. And I said, okay, so now you learned. Don't It's hard to do business with friends and family, right? Because they're not sticking there for the long term. They're good because it's, oh, that's cool, I'm going to help you with bookmarks. And then they're nowhere to be found, right? So these
absolutely.
are small lessons that they can learn that are entrepreneurship lessons,
Yeah,
but they've actually learned them at a very, very young age so that they can think about this. And whether they're going to be entrepreneurs later on, who knows?
yeah.
In the end, I can give them a good platform on how to use their intuition in every part of their life. And where it takes them is where it's going to be guided. Their success will be guided by their intuitive signals, because your intuition is never wrong.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sunil, for sharing with us your story and your family as well, and all about this intuition. I believe, like everyone that is listening, or we will be listening after this, they will think about and they will pay more attention to how do you feel really when you're about to do a decision. um my last question, I would like to for you to tell us, where are you, how can people connect with you? So if you are on social media, what is your social media platforms, website? And if you, I do have a link here about like a freebie, like find out how strong your intuition is when making business decisions. So I think you have something to give
Yep.
to my listeners.
Absolutely. So you can always go to sunilgodse.com. All the links are there. I'm all on the socials: LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, TikTok, and I'm either at Sunil Godse or at Intuitive Branding 101. So one of those two handles, you can find me there. My podcasts are on all the major platforms, or you can go to sunilgodse.com. See there, my books are there. And then, yeah, if you want to go to the link with the quiz, what it does is takes you to a quiz where in 12 questions, it takes about 2 minutes. It'll assess how strong your intuition is on a percentage basis. And
Huh?
then within there, I give you immediate steps on what you can do right now to strengthen your business, to get it up to that 100% level. And this is something you can do right away. So take advantage of that quiz, and that way you'll know exactly where your intuition is. And yeah, just take a deep dive into where I am. You can always DM me or email me, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Fantastic. All this information, Sunil, will be on the description of this session and on the podcast on every platform. So anyone that wants to get in touch with Sunil, just go to the end of the description. It will be the social media website and the freebie. So make sure you join us and you get what you deserve. Buy your intuition, don't forget.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you once again, Sunil, and it was a pleasure to have you. I'm so grateful for your presence, and in name of Women Flix, of course. And I'm sure we're gonna keep in touch. I always keep in
Absolutely.
touch with my guests, and I love the fact that I have this opportunity. Thank you,
Great. Thank
and
you.
God bless you. Take care. Bye
Thank
bye.
you. Bye.
Bye bye.